This is Ethan Fleischer, with a page from the Wolf Grimoire. Today is the perfect day to wipe the business of war from the face of the planet. It was never impossible, despite the incessant propaganda assuring us that large-scale violence simply cannot be stopped. It's true, however, that if we play the Wall Street warlords game, we will lose. If we attempt some violent revolutionary moment, even if we're backed by the smartest academics and well-respected philosophers, we'll lose. There is only one way to actually end the evil of war. Throw out all the intellectual arguments, the economic arguments, and simply speak the truth of the human spirit, which is that war is an evil as fundamental, ignorant, and evolutionarily backwards as the global institution of slavery was in the 19th century. Because war is a fundamental evil against the human spirit and the most basic conditions for life on this planet, there can be no just war, nor just act of war, and all state violence must be recognized as an unquestionable evil. This is the nature of war in our hyper-capitalist world today. It's the same brutal enforcement tool of the ruling class that it has always been since the dawn of centralized powers. But over the last half-century, the privatization of so many elements of warfare has engendered powerful new economic incentives. The military-industrial complex today is the public-private partnership bar none, sucking up trillions in taxpayer funds, yet simultaneously raking in massive profits, effectively disincentivizing any measure of peace. Once warfare was concretized as a legitimate business, warlords set about removing all boundaries and limitations to endless profit. Recognizing that Americans would never support sending hundreds of thousands of their own children to die in forever wars, Wall Street and the Pentagon spooks set about devising the current system. NATO and American handlers mass recruit proxy forces from economically desperate regions around the globe, while arms contractors get filthy rich selling all sides of the conflict the weaponry. Through the reliance on proxy fighters, the typical risks of battle were nullified for regular Americans. And so the corporate state was free to make mass slaughter into just another component of their economic machine. War itself has not changed in 1,000 years, nor 10,000 years. But the warlord, having become white-collar and cosmopolitan, no longer wears that ancient identity on their sleeve. The rivers of bloodlust, power, and sadism flow over the walls of the Pentagon and straight down the sidewalks of Silicon Valley. The warlords of the Beltway. The bleak reality is that the warlords of the Western ruling class are no longer an ultra-wealthy handful of barely human elites and royals. They are increasingly upper-middle-class Joes, very much like yourself perhaps. Academics, engineers, and even good liberals. In fact, it's probably safe to bet that most of them are very pleasant folks. They love the gays, regularly recycle, vaccinate the hell out of their children, and definitely feel for the plight of immigrant workers. And yet, despite their pleasantness, they have chosen to put a salary and a career over the lives of millions of everyday people across the globe. Despite harboring no apparent ill wills, their actions directly result in the wholesale slaughter and maiming of children, women, and the elderly. They may play a mean frolf game and jog the block with their 3 well-behaved huskies, making the best darn dad jokes, but they are sleeping soundly through the night while their work crashes through the ceiling of a family home and virtually incinerates a mother of 5, mangles the legs of a teenager, very much like your own American teenager perhaps, and leaves a 6-year-old girl staring breathlessly at the shredded bloody stumps that used to be her hands she'd lifted to cover her ruptured eardrums. That one highly educated and loving aunt who gave you all that dating advice that your young friends couldn't, she cashes checks earned on the decimation of whole city blocks, in which hundreds of people already suffering the generational agony of war zones past are literally shredded in a whirlwind of fire and debris. She buys designer coats with the money she earned by allowing the most vicious and effective butchers in all of human history to butcher with even more effectiveness. She eats overpriced sushi in a popular restaurant, paid for by the melted eyeballs of toddlers and the torn naked feet of displaced pregnant mothers who trudge for dozens of miles with no food or water only to take cover in some new war-torn hellhole no safer than their shredded or their shelled-out origins. The notion that some runaway anti-war movement will use this same sort of violence that's employed by the warlords against family and friends, individuals who are genuinely loved and respected for respectable reasons, this is simply flawed. It's deeply unrealistic. A realistic and measured assessment of the ruling class war machine reveals an institution so entrenched in the everyday economic life of America that it's likewise as preposterous to suggest intellectual arguments will make any real headway in the path to peace. A new notion has to arise. It's the truth. The inevitable truth that war is a nightmare of history, one that must and will be crushed as a moral evil in the same way that the world collectively crushed slavery, despite its existence as a massive economic institution. Resistance is futile. If we attempt to beat the military-industrial complex with clever political or economic maneuvers, they will devour the movement and use the infrastructure activists have built in order to disassemble future movements. This process has been playing out again and again since American intelligence agencies and law enforcement perfected their methods through programs like COINTELPRO and Chaos, in which dozens of anti-war and civil rights groups were infiltrated, surveilled, and sabotaged. The most basic argument that will be levied against peace groups, spoken like some unimpeachable truth of the soul, will probably go like this. But war is inevitable. It's the only solution to certain conflicts. Specifically, we will be accused of using slavery as an example of a moral evil overcome by the people, when it required war to accomplish its abolition. This will be argued with an air of intellectual supremacy and coy certainty. But in many places across the Western world, slavery was abolished with little to no violence. Pointing out America's unbelievably bloody battle over slavery only acknowledges a total failure of peace in the States, while abolition was in fact achieved across most of Europe without proper war, and in no way provides some kind of proof for war's inevitability. To be pulled in debates over economic viability, the use of targeted drones and tech to somehow make mass slaughter more ethical or palatable, or the legal rights of criminalistic, extra-legal state apparatuses to retaliate with systemic force, this is all misled. When we play these games, we play with the rules created by corrupt players, and there can be no successful peace. War is not a racket. Rather, it's more like Judge Holden said in Blood Meridian, McCarthy's magnum opus on the nature of systemic bloodshed. No, war is God. And you don't kill a god by meekly debating international law and diplomacy with the very prophets of the war god themselves. Nor do you destroy an institution of violence by adopting violence. The most basic truth of peace is that peace is always sufficient. War is a moral evil unparalleled in history, and it stops in the 21st century. The advent of internet and mass media has made war's abolition inevitable. Because the crime of war is so explicit and so abhorrent, there will be no negotiations. There will be no caveats. Peace is it. We will have nothing else.